The conference suite of the Valith Sovereignty's orbital station had been designed to be legible to human diplomatic sensibility, which Darin Sael appreciated in the professional way that he appreciated well-prepared counterparts. It indicated that whoever had set up the room had done their research, which meant he was dealing with someone who took the work seriously. The proportions were human comfortable. The lighting was human spectrum. The table was at human-optimized height. Everything about the room said, "We know you, we have prepared for you, we are taking this seriously." He had been taking it seriously for 2 hours. He had the posture he used for negotiations that required sustained, controlled engagement, not the relaxed version, which read as insufficiently invested, and not the forward version, which read as pressured, but the middle register of a diplomat who was present and attentive and in no particular hurry, because hurry was a tell. He had controlled his expression through her opening proposal, which had been structured cleverly, and through the first round of counteroffers, which had been structured more cleverly, and through the pause she had taken at minute 73 when she had moved to the viewport and he had used the window to think. He had been using it to think for the past several minutes. The counterargument he was building had 3 parts. The first part addressed the tariff schedule she had proposed, the specific clause that created a liability asymmetry he was not going to accept without adjustment, and that he had a precedent-based objection to that he had been planning to deploy at the moment when the objection would be most productive rather than merely accurate. The second part addressed the inspection protocol, where her proposed language gave the Valith Sovereignty an audit right that his mandate did not permit him to concede without conditions. The third part was still forming, a synthesis of the first 2 that would restructure the conversation around a counterproposal he had been building toward, the piece that would reframe the entire tariff discussion in terms that moved the inspection protocol liability from his side of the table to a shared mechanism. He had the first 2 parts. He was working on the third. He had not spoken. The thought was not finished. He was mid-construction, the third part approximately 70% complete when she turned from the viewport. She said his first part. She said it in his phrasing, not close to his phrasing, not a reasonable inference of his phrasing, but the specific formulation he had been using internally, the words in the order he had arranged them with the specific emphasis he had placed on liability asymmetry, because that was the frame he had decided to use. She said his second part. She said his third part. She said a version of his third part that was more complete than his own draft, the synthesis cleaner than his, the reframing sharper. And he sat across the table from her with the arrested cognition of a man whose internal monologue had just been spoken back to him verbatim by the person he had believed was at the other end of a one-way transmission. His first thought was the communication implant. Compromised. Someone had accessed the implant's passive transcription function, which was technically not a transmission but stored data, and if the room had the right receiver array. She said, "It's not your implant." He looked at her. She said 3 words. She said them quietly, in the way of someone delivering information they have been holding for 2 hours and have decided can no longer be held. "I hear everything." The room did not change. The lighting remained human spectrum. The table remained at human-optimized height. Everything about the room continued to say, "We know you, we have prepared for you," and he understood, sitting in the specific arrested silence of someone whose operating framework has just been comprehensively invalidated, that the preparation had been more thorough than he had understood. She did not perform what came next. That was the thing he registered first, in the part of his cognition that was still running its professional assessment underneath the larger process of recalibration. She did not deliver the clarification with the quality of someone producing a strategic reveal, which was the context in which he had experienced information disclosures of this category before. It did not have the shape of a negotiating move. It had the shape of something else, which he did not yet have a word for, and which he filed under significant spending while he processed what she was saying. She explained Valith neurophysiology in the patient, specific way of someone who had given this explanation before to people who had no biological framework for receiving it, and understood that the gap between the explanation and actual comprehension was wide and required time and precision to cross. Her species perceived electromagnetic neural patterns, not inferred them, not read them through behavioral inference, not calculated them from microexpression and response timing. Perceived them. The content of thought, not the symptoms of thought, with a clarity that her closest analog after years of explaining it to non-Valith was hearing spoken words, not like it. With the same directness, the same immediacy, the same involuntary reception. She had been experiencing his deliberations since he entered the room, all of them. He sat with this. His professional reflex wanted to inventory the damage, to run through the past 2 hours and identify which thoughts had been strategic, which had been evaluative, which had been things he would not have said aloud under any diplomatic protocol. The inventory began automatically and he let it run, because stopping it would not change what she had already received and might as well be useful. "You know I'm doing that," he said. "Yes," she said. "The inventory." "Yes." "What am I thinking right now?" he said. Not a challenge, a test, the automatic verification response of a man checking whether the claim matched the evidence. She told him what he was thinking. She told him in his internal phrasing, in the order the thoughts were occurring, including the one he had been having about whether asking her to tell him what he was thinking was itself a thought she was already aware he was going to have. He looked at the table for a moment. "The entire negotiation," he said. "Yes," she said. 2 hours. "Yes." "You knew every counterargument before I voiced it." "Yes." "You knew which terms I had flexibility on and which I didn't." "Yes." "You agreed to the modified delivery schedule at minute 89, he said. "I had been preparing to push for that. I didn't even have to argue for it." "No," she said. "I could hear that it was your priority." Arguing would have been, she paused, choosing the word with the care of someone who had thought about this often. "There's a word in Valith. My translator renders it approximately as cruelty by precision. The cruelty of demonstrating power you have specifically decided not to use. I did not want to do that to you." He looked at her. She was sitting across the table with the composed quality he had been reading for 2 hours as the controlled stillness of a skilled negotiator. Which it was, he understood now, but the control was over a different thing than he had been reading it as. The stillness was not the management of strategy. It was the management of reception, the ongoing labor of experiencing another person's continuous internal monologue and performing, for their benefit, the fiction that you weren't. "You've been doing this for 2 hours, he said. "Yes," she said. "That sounds exhausting," he said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but the specific quality of someone encountering a response that their model had not predicted as the first response, which he noted was information about what she had been expecting him to say, which meant she had been expecting something else, which meant his actual first response was outside her model. He held on to this. "It is," she said after a moment, "it is exhausting." "Why tell me now?" he said. "If you had the advantage, why give it up?" She looked at the viewport, the same viewport she had been standing at when she turned and completed his thought, and he understood now what the space at the viewport had been. Not a negotiating pause, a limit being approached. "Because I was going to spend this entire negotiation pretending to wait for you to finish thoughts I had already received," she said. "And you were going to spend it believing you were maintaining a strategic surface, and we were going to reach an agreement eventually, built entirely on a fiction that only one of us knew was a fiction." She looked back at him. "I did not want to build that." He sat with this. "What do you want to build instead?" he said. He spent the night in his quarters on the station's diplomatic residential level, which he had been assigned on arrival, and which had the careful human comfortable design of the conference suite, and he understood now that the design was not consideration but research, and that research this thorough was itself a form of honesty about how seriously the Veilith sovereignty took this encounter. He thought for a long time. Then he wrote the most honest diplomatic assessment he had produced in his career, which was also the strangest, because the document he was writing was for an audience who would hear him writing it, who could hear him, right now, deciding what to include and what to omit, and then recognizing that the decision to omit was itself audible, which meant that the only document that made functional sense was a complete one. He wrote a complete one. He wrote what his actual position was on each of the open terms, not his opening position, not his walkaway position, but the genuine assessment underneath both. He wrote what he thought of her proposal, which was that it was well constructed and showed a clear understanding of his mandate's constraints, which he had been treating as a problem but was actually, he decided at 2 in the morning, a feature. He wrote what he found professionally admirable about her approach, which she had heard already but which he had not said aloud, and which had therefore existed as a private evaluation she had been receiving while he maintained the performance of measured professional engagement. He wrote, "I understand that you will hear me writing this. I am writing it knowing you will hear it. This is the most honest thing I know how to do with the situation I'm in." He read it back. He submitted it to his own professional judgment. He found it adequate, not in the diplomatic sense of adequate, which meant functional and defensible, but in the plain sense, enough, true enough to work with. He slept 4 hours. He returned to the conference suite at the appointed time and found her already there, which was consistent. She was watching him come in with the focused attention he had been reading as assessment for 2 hours yesterday, and was now reading as something more specific, not assessment, but reception. She was hearing him arrive. She was hearing the thoughts of a man who had spent the night deciding to be honest in a situation where honesty was not a choice, but was also, he had concluded somewhere around 3 in the morning, not a concession. "You read the document," he said. "I heard you write it," she said. "Yes." He sat down. He looked at the table and then at her and then did not look away, because looking away was a management reflex and management was no longer available as a strategy. "I have a question," he said, "before we continue." "Ask it," she said. "When you hear," he stopped, started again. "When you receive someone's thoughts, is there a difference between what a person is thinking and what they're feeling? Or are those the same signal?" She considered this in the genuine way, not the performed pause of a negotiator, which he understood now was a courtesy performance she had been maintaining for his benefit, but actual consideration, the real pause of someone reaching for accurate language. "They're the same signal," she said. "Thought and feeling are not separate processes in neural electromagnetic pattern. What I receive is both simultaneously." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to understand what you've been receiving," he said. "For 2 hours yesterday. Not the strategy, I understand the strategy, the rest." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at him with the specific quality of attention that he had been learning to read differently since yesterday and was still learning. The attention of someone who was receiving more than he was transmitting, which was all of it, which was the whole of what it meant to be in a room with a Veilith telepath, and which was going to require, he understood, a continuous recalibration that had no endpoint. "The rest," she said, "you are very curious," she said. "Under the strategy. I receive a great deal of strategy from the people I negotiate with, and underneath it this or that. Under yours there is a great deal of curiosity. You find things interesting at a rate that your diplomatic training does not fully suppress." She paused. I found it easier to receive than most." He looked at her. He was thinking something specific. He knew she knew he was thinking something specific. He said it anyway, because that was the conclusion he had reached at 3 in the morning. That saying the things he was thinking was the only functional approach to a situation where she was going to receive them regardless, and that choosing not to say them added a layer of pretense without adding any privacy. "I find you interesting," he said. "That's been in the signal since hour 1, you knew that." "Yes," she said. "I was performing not having said it." Yes, she said, and you were performing not having heard it. Yes, she said. We were both doing a lot of performing, he said. Yes, she said. It is the standard format for cross-species diplomatic engagement. Both parties perform their respective roles. The fiction is mutually maintained. What would it look like, he said, if we didn't maintain it? She looked at him for a long moment. He was thinking something and she was hearing it, and he was aware of both of these things and was not managing either of them, which was the thing he had decided to try, not as a strategy, but as the only remaining honest option. And also, he was aware and she was aware he was aware, because he was genuinely curious about the answer. I don't know, she said. I have not attempted this before. She held his gaze in the specific direct way that he was learning was her register for delivering things she was certain of. I have been in many negotiations. I have received many people's thoughts for the duration of many hours. Most of them are tactical predominantly. The curiosity is usually narrow, strategic. She paused. Yours is broader than that. You became interested in me as a person, somewhere around minute 45. The point where you disagreed with me about the inspection protocol, he said. Yes, she said. You were right, he said. My objection had a flaw in the third premise. You found it before I did. I heard you find it, she said, after I raised the counter. And I was thinking something about that. That you were thinking, she said precisely. That you found it interesting that I had found the flaw, because the flaw was subtle and you had not expected the counter to be constructed at that level, and that this was information about what kind of intelligence you were negotiating with, and that the information was welcome. Yes, he said, that's exactly right. She looked at him. He looked at her. The conference suite held its human comfortable proportions and its human spectrum lighting, and the two of them sitting at a table that had been designed for exactly this kind of encounter, and had never, he suspected, held exactly this kind of encounter before. The terms, he said, the ones we haven't resolved, the processing fee schedule and the dispute escalation protocol. Yes, she said. I'm going to tell you what I actually think about both of them, he said. Not my opening position, not my walkaway, what I actually think. She was quiet for a moment. He heard nothing. He could not hear her. He had no access to her thoughts. The asymmetry was permanent and structural, and was not going to be resolved by mutual goodwill or honest communication or anything else he had available. He knew this. He had accepted it at approximately 2:45 in the morning. That is not standard diplomatic protocol, she said. No, he said. You are aware that it disadvantages you materially. I'm aware that the alternative is maintaining a performance for an audience who can hear the performance and the thing it's covering simultaneously, he said, which doesn't seem like a better option. She looked at him for a long moment. He was thinking something specific, and she was hearing it. He was thinking that she had turned from the viewport yesterday, not because she had decided to reveal her advantage, but because she had been in the room with a person for 2 hours, and had been receiving not just strategy, but the continuous interior of another person's genuine engagement, and that something in that engagement had made pretending not to hear it feel like a wrong she didn't want to commit. He was thinking that she had told him because she had, somewhere in the previous 2 hours, found him worth telling. She was quiet. She was looking at him with the attention that was reception, the focus that was hearing, and he sat in the fundamental asymmetry of the situation without attempting to manage it, and waited to see what she would do with what she was hearing. Tell me what you actually think about the processing fee schedule, she said. He told her. He told her what he actually thought, not in the diplomatic register, but in the plain register of a man describing his real position, and she listened, she received. And her expression moved across the things it moved across when she was genuinely engaged with something, which he was learning to distinguish from the performed version. They negotiated for 4 more hours. The negotiation was unlike anything in his professional experience, and unlike anything in hers, which she told him at hour 3 when he asked directly. You keep thinking things that I have not predicted, she said, at a point where the processing fee structure had been substantially resolved, and the dispute escalation protocol was developing in a direction neither of them had brought into the room. Most people I negotiate with, their thoughts run in fairly predictable architectures. Strategy generates counter-strategy generates contingency. It is, she searched for the word. Legible, she said. Yours is legible, but the pattern shifts. You think sideways. My supervisor calls it a liability, he said. Your supervisor has not been receiving it for 4 hours, she said. There was something in her voice. He was filing under significant spending and would review later. It is not a liability in this context. He was thinking something. She was hearing it. He said it. What is it in this context? She looked at him across the table. She was, he had come to understand, a person who was precise about language, not because she lacked access to the imprecise version, but because she had access to a great deal more than most people, and had found that precision was the only honest response to that access. Interesting, she said. In this context it is interesting. He was thinking something specific. She knew exactly what it was. He did not say it, because there was a category of honest thought that was honest enough to remain thought for now. He had not concluded that every thought needed to be spoken, only that pretending to think different thoughts than he was thinking was a fiction he lacked the architecture to maintain. The thought was present. She received it. Neither of them addressed it, which was itself a kind of address, and both of them knew it. And the negotiation continued in the specific and unprecedented way of something neither of them had a protocol for, and both of them were, for reasons that were partly professional and partly the other thing, interested in figuring out. The dispute escalation protocol was resolved at hour 4. It was better than what either of them had brought into the room, which was the outcome that happened when both parties were negotiating from what they actually thought rather than what they had decided to perform, and which Darin wrote up in his session notes as reached through unconventional methodology. Recommend further study. Recommend further study was, in diplomatic notation, a phrase with a specific professional meaning. It also, in the plain language of a man whose thoughts were not private and who had decided to be honest about what he was thinking, had a plain meaning. She heard both. She said nothing about either one, because she was a precise woman and this was a negotiation, and there was a category of honest reception that was honest enough to remain reception for now. But her expression, when he closed his session notes and looked at her across the table at the end of the 4th hour, was doing the thing that expressions did when they contained something being held with care. And he was learning to read that, and found it, as he found most things about her, specifically and genuinely interesting. Tomorrow, she said, the remaining terms. Tomorrow, he agreed. He did not know what she was thinking. He was aware of not knowing in the way you were aware of a structural absence, the specific weight of a one-way asymmetry that was not going to resolve. He had accepted this. He had accepted it at 2:45 in the morning and was still accepting it, the acceptance ongoing rather than completed, which was honest. She turned back toward the viewport as he rose to leave. He looked at the back of her head for a moment, at the specific quality of her stillness, which he was learning to read as presence rather than distance, as the contained attention of someone who was receiving everything in a room and had chosen to be in it anyway. I can hear you thinking about the asymmetry again, she said without turning. I know, he said. It bothers you less than it did yesterday. I know that too, he said. She turned. She looked at him with the direct attention of someone who had been receiving him for 6 hours and had arrived at a position on the basis of the reception, and who was precise about language, and who was looking at him with an expression that was not the diplomatic register, and was not the performed register, and was something he did not have a name for yet. It bothers me less than I expected, she said, that you know that you stayed. He was thinking something. She was hearing it. It was the true version, not the managed version, not the professional version, the actual thought of a man who had spent 6 hours being heard completely, and had found it, against all prior expectation, to be the least